State of the Art aired in 1987 on Channel 4 in the UK and attempted a comprehensive documentary on the contemporary art world, allegedly something of a follow-up to Robert Hughes' monumental project, The Shock of the New, previously discussed here on AOD. Over 6 parts, Sandy Nan curates up to 60 artists across the globe, distilling the feeling of the contemporary via paintings, sculpture, installations, and abstract performances. The gallery arts as we know them, these guys turn their noses up at film. So I remember once Noel Oakeshott made the profound point that if we were to consider it a work of art, the most influential work of art in human history might be the first photograph. Imitation of life was no longer an immediate, the most obvious priority of the visual arts. This is not far or adjacent to the birth of Impressionism, and then modernism as we know it in the visual arts in general, and the development of animation in general, of which live-action photography was the most produced mode of by far, was slow and highly expensive, and so most eventual animation cinematic innovations occurred in the highly monetized world of Hollywood, or other nations funneling their resources into glamorous filmic epics. By the 1980s, it was becoming more and more apparent with the advent of video art, digital animation, and independent film in general, that animation or cinema was superseding the relevance of the still visual arts, and even installations were relying more and more upon filmed or animated works composed for the event anyway. State of the Art is a superb distillation of the visual arts as of the 80s, at the close of The Shock of the New's conclusion, and what I found most disappointing about it is perhaps a consequence of the now rather than any lack of effort placed into this series initially. Visual art is in the same place as it was during the later 80s, apparently. The 90s seemingly extended the ideas explored in this documentary, naturally, but then the 2000s were just obsessed with the internet and digital, the hollow concept of identity and a subjective experience. Effectively, what the conceptual art of the, say, 1980s was concerned with, now electrified further with this superficial digital sheen. The price of everything from 2018 is an informative window into that scene, and indeed it has not changed significantly since the late 80s. Cinema has changed demonstratively. Animation at large, obviously. I suspect that the leap from the 40s/50s to the 70s/80s is not repeated from the 80s to the 2020s now, at least not in those gallery spaces, I feel. Now, episode 6 of State of the Art is worth particular mention. I only have images of the first episode here, sorry for any inconvenience. I couldn't be bothered capping between narration after a while, frankly, for featuring, yes, episode 6 does, for featuring Australian artists, including Aboriginal painters, explaining some of the issues which arise from a certain trivialization or commercialization, potential exploitation, of Indigenous/minority art via white elitists, transitioning then to New York City. Jean-Michel Basquiat, an artist whose genius is in mild part due to his being aware that he was being tokenized, fetishized by the white onlookers. And sadly, this jaded him, and having him feel as though he was or would become old news, so to speak, potentially enabled his further spiral into habits which took him from us far, far too soon. And then the art world/white elitist world really learned nothing from this. To inform you all more directly of the content of this series, I'll read about this description here. It lists many or all of the artists discussed in this series here. A series of 6 authoritative and challenging documentaries about the visual arts in the 1980s, filmed in Europe, the United States, and Australia in 1985 to 6. The 6 programs feature many key artists, including Joseph Beuys, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, Beuy's, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Cindy Sherman, Antony Gormley, Hans Hack, and Eric Fischl. Framing the works and concerns of these artists is the intellectual context of the time, and especially the contemporary concerns of postmodernism. Each film adopts a thematic approach, with episodes looking at history, value, imagination, politics, sexuality, and identity. The argument of each program develops through juxtaposition and comparison, with a complex interplay of image and sound rather than didactic commentary. There's more didactic commentary than they're letting on, to be fair. 1 begins in the postmodern world and examines the work of 4 artists who look to the past to make sense of the present and the future, presents the post-war capitalization of communications technology as a primary focus for the self-understanding and critical perception of artists, 3 European history painters, the Italian neoclassicist Carlo Maria Mariani and the German allegorists Georg Immendorf and Anselm Kiefer, and American installation artist and dream collator Jonathan Borofsky, discuss the responsibilities of the artist in relation to the post-war Western experience of modernity. 2. considers 5 places in which validation and valuation occur: the private gallery, the private collection, the public museum, the art magazine, and the public site. How is critical evaluation arrived at, and what are the economic interests that underpin it? Interviews with dealers Michael Werner and Mary Boone, the director of the Deutsche Bank's collection, Dr. Zapp, the producer of the American soap operas Dallas and the Colbys, and collector Douglas S. Kramer, give an insight into art as a paranational industry and an increasingly consumerist source of social value. The second section looks at the Part Big Museums plan, the ratification and extensions of this process, and includes an interview with Richard Kochalek, director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, ends with interviews of various art critics on the role of criticism. 3. Investigating the linked themes of work, creativity, and imagination, explores the process of creativity with 5 artists working in distinct and very different ways. The status and process of artistic production is variously contrasted in interviews with Joseph Beuys, Beuy's, Federal Republic of Germany, Anthony Gormley, UK, Miriam Kahn, Switzerland, Howard Hodgkin, UK, and Susan Hiller, UK. 4. Explores how artists can create alternatives to the conventional images of women and men in fashion, magazines, and the media. In this instance, the circulation of images of women as desired objects. Includes interviews of Cindy Sherman, USA, Alexis Hunter, UK, Eric Fishy, USA, Mary Kelly, UK, and Barbara Kruger, USA. 5. The work of each of the artists in this program has an explicit dimension. The monumental paintings of Leon Golob, USA, portray scenes of contemporary violence and torture. The work of Hans Haak, USA, is an investigation of power structures within and beyond the art world. Peter Dunn and Lorraine Leeson, UK, are involved in community photography in London's Docklands. Victor Bergen, UK, is concerned with male sexuality and sees his activities as a writer and teacher as an extension of his practice as an artist. The painter Terry Atkinson explores the themes of Northern Ireland and nuclear warfare. 6. Looks at the centre/periphery debate in relation to cultural identity, examines at Australian art where white Australian artists feel marginalised in relation to Europe and the USA, and where Aboriginal culture stands as a marginal and oppressed relation to the Aboriginal settler culture. There are interviews with Terry Smith on the 1986 Sydney Biennale, Thomas McAvilly on the question of culture diffusion, the Aboriginal painter Michael Nelson Jackamara on his painting Possum Dreaming, and the Australian artist Amance Tillers on the virtues of working to a small canvas. Discusses the emergence of black art in Britain and includes interviews with Lubaina Himid, Donald Rodney, Sonia Boyce, and Sutapa Biswas. Looks at the pitfalls of being absorbed into the art market as exotic spectacle, as in the media collaboration between Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat in the USA. I have one criticism of the series inherent to the choices made by the creators, and that is how certain ideas come and go and can sometimes feel like they are novelty or trivial points, quotations from the artists, that is, relating to how topics such as sex, gender, identity, legacy, and representation itself are perceived in the often changing 20th century epoch. Often the art world could be accused of positing too much what-ifs and are-we's, rather than stating definitive conceptual points or statements. I viewed an interview with the writer of this series, Zandy Nan, and sure enough he seems to claim this is one regret about the series overall, but they had less time allocated, even in 6 hours, to include all of the passages he would have liked where the artist's own words were concerned. Valuable, though less revelatory than I'd anticipated, not due to the documentary itself, but more due to the art world becoming stagnant and conservative since this series aired, so proud of itself and smugly satisfied with the obscurantist elitism of the conceptual newspaper cartoon pathologies, which also stagnate them. I don't think we need to move back to this vaguely hackneyed Roger Scruton idea of beauty either. Again, think about the significance of first the photograph and then animation, moving pictures under that of course, although the still arts are sooner perceived as some old classy novelty for status seekers than it is for those who are on the vanguard of new, relevant human expression, sadly. But it's important to learn as much as possible about it, because then you have a right to constructively criticize it in the first place, and I barely do, I feel. But I'm putting it out there so that someone can possibly, hopefully even, tell me I'm wrong. So thanks again everyone, have the most magnificent day of your life, all of you.